Luria came from a world far beyond the stars, a planet called Virella, where the skies shimmered silver and the people lived with great pride. Her people, the Therians, were tall, strong, and sharp-minded. They had long, elegant tails and eyes that glowed softly in the dark. From birth, every Therian was taught that feelings made a warrior weak and that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They said humans were wild, emotional, and capable of terrible destruction. To Luria, that was truth. She had grown up believing love was a trap, mercy was foolish, and trust was death. She became a scout officer, one of the best in her class. Her life was about orders, discipline, and missions. When the Galactic Alliance sent her unit to observe Earth after a failed peace attempt, she didn't hesitate. It was a simple mission: study human behavior and report back. But fate never follows plans. During their descent through Earth's atmosphere, a sudden storm of meteors hit their ship. The engines failed, alarms screamed, and everything became a blur of fire and chaos. Luria tried to guide the ship down, but it crashed deep in a snowy forest, far from any city. When she opened her eyes, smoke rose from the wreck. Her armor was broken, her team was gone, and her communicator sparked uselessly. The cold air cut into her lungs. Snow fell over her like a blanket of glass. She had survived battles before, but this was different. There was no one to command, no ship to call for help, and no stars to guide her. She stood alone in a world she was trained to fear. For the first time, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel: fear. The forest around her was silent except for the wind. Strange shapes of trees loomed like creatures. Her body trembled not just from cold but from uncertainty. She activated the last energy left in her armor, scanning for heat signatures. Nothing. Then faintly, in the far distance, a single light appeared, a warm golden glow cutting through the dark snow. It flickered like a small star on the ground. She hesitated. Her instincts warned her to stay hidden, to wait until her people found her. But another part of her, quiet and new, pushed her forward. She walked toward the light, her steps slow and heavy in the deep snow. The path was rough and her strength was fading. Her sharp eyes caught movement, a small wooden structure surrounded by trees. Smoke rose from a chimney. Through a window she saw firelight and shadows moving inside. A human lived there. Every lesson she had learned told her to turn away. Humans were unpredictable. They could kill without thought. But she was freezing, weak, and desperate. If she stayed outside, she would die before dawn. The door of the cabin creaked open slightly, letting out a warm breath of air. Inside stood a man. He looked nothing like the fierce creature she had imagined. He was tall but gentle-faced, wrapped in thick clothes. His brown hair was messy, and his eyes held quiet worry. He spoke words she could not understand, but his tone was calm, not hostile. She raised her weapon, aiming it shakily at him. He didn't move. Instead, he slowly lifted his hands, showing he meant no harm. Then in a soft voice, he said something again. She didn't understand the language, but somehow she knew what it meant. It sounded like, "It's all right. You're safe." Her body swayed. The cold, the pain, and the confusion became too much. The weapon slipped from her hand, falling into the snow. Before she could react, darkness filled her vision and she collapsed. When she woke again, she was inside. The heat from a fireplace warmed her skin. Her armor had been removed carefully and placed nearby. Her wounds were bandaged. The same man sat in a chair beside her, watching quietly. His eyes were kind, yet filled with sadness, as if he carried pain of his own. When he noticed she was awake, he smiled a little and offered her water. She didn't take it. She didn't trust him. Yet when he moved to set it down beside her, his actions were slow and respectful. He spoke softly, trying to comfort her even though she couldn't understand his words. Hours passed. Luria studied him carefully. He wasn't armed. He didn't act like a soldier. He seemed to live simply, surrounded by books, old tools, and pictures. Everything about this man was opposite to what she had been taught. There was no cruelty, no hatred, only quiet care. She watched as he fixed something near the fire, humming softly to himself. The sound was strange but peaceful. For the first time since her crash, she felt her heart steady. She tried to rise, but her legs trembled. He rushed forward, holding out H to question what she was. She looked injured, fragile, and lost. Even though she didn't look human, her eyes had something he recognized: fear. So he had brought her home, cleaned her wounds, and made sure she was warm. He didn't know what she was or where she came from, but he knew she needed help. Now as days passed, their strange coexistence continued. Luria stayed cautious. She watched Eli's every move with suspicion. Whenever he approached too close, she tensed, ready to defend herself. But Eli never showed aggression. He spoke in a calm voice, used slow gestures, and made sure not to surprise her. When she didn't eat, he left food near her and stepped back. When she avoided his eyes, he gave her space. Slowly, she began to realize he was not like the human she had imagined. One morning, Eli walked outside to cut firewood. Laura followed him silently, watching through the frosted window. The way he worked puzzled her. His movements were steady and patient. He didn't rush or complain. When his axe slipped and cut his glove, he didn't shout or destroy the tool. He just fixed it quietly and kept going. Among her people, mistakes were signs of weakness. Here, mistakes were simply part of living. She didn't understand it, but it made her curious. When he returned, he saw her staring. He smiled a little and pointed toward the fireplace, trying to tell her that the wood would keep them warm. She didn't understand his words, but she nodded slightly. That small nod was the first silent bridge between them. Later that evening, as snow began to fall again, Eli sat on the floor, drawing something on paper. Laura tilted her head, unsure what he was doing. He showed her the page, a simple sketch of a fox-tailed woman with bright eyes standing beside a man in the woods. It was her. She stared at it, unsure whether to feel offended or touched. Eli pointed at her tail, smiled, and then pointed at himself, laughing softly. She didn't know what that laugh meant, but it wasn't cruel. It was light, warm, and human. Over the next few days, they found small ways to communicate. Eli taught her simple words by pointing at objects. He would say fire, water, sky, and she would repeat them awkwardly, her accent strange but clear. She started to mimic his sounds, and sometimes he would laugh softly when she mispronounced something. For a warrior who had always lived by rules, laughter felt strange. She didn't know that sound could make her chest feel lighter. At night, when Eli thought she was asleep, she often watched him. He would sit near the fire, reading an old book or staring at photographs. Once, she crept closer and saw a picture of him with 3 smiling people. The woman had the same gentle eyes as Eli, and the little girl held his arm tightly. She didn't need translation to understand. They were his family. They were gone now, but the memory still lived in his heart. It made her wonder if that was why he lived alone, far from everything. Luria didn't understand grief the way humans did. The Aryans were taught to let go of the past, to forget those who were lost. But Eli kept his pain close, as if it reminded him to be kind. He carried sorrow like a scar, but instead of making him hard, it made him gentle. She found that strange and beautiful. One evening, while snow whirled outside like white dust, Eli cooked a simple meal. The smell was warm and comforting. He pushed a plate toward her. She hesitated, staring at the strange human food. He didn't insist. He took a small bite himself first, showing it was safe. She finally tried it. The flavor was mild, not like the sharp energy gels her people ate. It was real food filled with warmth. She didn't show it, but she liked it. Eli noticed the small way her tail flicked, almost like a shy smile. When she finished eating, he whispered something softly, words she didn't yet understand. But his voice carried kindness, not command. For someone trained to fight and obey, kindness was the most confusing thing of all. That night, when the firelight painted their shadows on the wall, she sat quietly beside him. He showed her the stars through a small telescope. She looked into it and saw the vast black sky filled with glittering points. She whispered in her language, a phrase meaning, home between lights. Eli didn't understand the words, but he understood her tone. He nodded, whispering the English word, beautiful. Luria repeated it softly, tasting the word. Beautiful. It was her first human word that held emotion. She didn't realize it then, but something deep inside her was changing. The walls of fear and tragio were beginning to crack. When Eli fell asleep that night, she stayed awake by the fire, her eyes reflecting the flame. She thought of how her people said humans were violent, that they destroyed everything they touched. Yet this man had shown her only care and peace. He didn't demand her loyalty, didn't expect gratitude. He simply gave warmth. She reached out slowly and touched the wooden table, tracing the marks of his work. Small scratches, burned spots, and signs of repair. Everything here carried his touch, his quiet life. She realized humans didn't destroy everything. Sometimes they built beauty out of broken things. Outside, the storm grew stronger, howling through the trees. Inside, a strange calm filled the cabin. Luria looked at the sleeping man by the fire and felt an unfamiliar pull in her heart. It wasn't fear nor duty. It was so one afternoon, while Eli repaired a broken solar panel outside, Luria walked around the cabin. Her sharp eyes caught every detail. The shelves filled with books, the photographs pinned on the wall, the carved wooden animals on the table. She stopped before one picture showing Eli with his family again. The child smiled brightly, holding a toy plane. Something in that image made Luria's chest tighten. Her people never smiled like that. Their faces were proud, serious, controlled. But here the smile looked like light. She didn't understand why such emotion could be seen as weakness. Eli entered, brushing off snow. He saw her looking at the photograph and stopped. For a moment the room felt heavy. Then he said softly, "My sister." He didn't say more, but his eyes told the story: loss, love, and memory. Lura nodded slowly. She didn't have the right words to comfort him, but she understood. Pain connected all beings, no matter their world. As days passed, they started sharing small habits. Luria helped him with work. She carried logs from outside, learning how to use her strength without breaking things. Eli taught her to light a fire using human tools. At first she failed, growing frustrated. Her claws were built for battle, not fine tasks. Eli didn't laugh. He simply guided her hands and showed her slowly, step by step. When the fire finally sparked, she smiled without realizing it. Eli noticed and said, "Good job." The words were simple, but they warmed her more than the flames. One evening, as twilight painted the snow in silver light, Eli brought out a small box. He opened it to reveal a music player. When he pressed the button, soft sound filled the room. It was slow and gentle, unlike the battle drums of her world. The melody floated like wind through stars. Luria froze, listening. Her ears twitched slightly. The sound touched something deep inside her. She had never felt music before, only orders and silence. Now, each note felt alive. Eli smiled as he watched her face soften. "Beautiful," he said. The word again. She repeated it softly. "Beautiful." He nodded. That word became their shared language for moments that needed no translation. One night, a strange silence filled the forest. Even the wind stopped. Laura stepped outside, wearing a blanket Eli had given her. The sky was wide and full of stars. She whispered to herself in her native tongue, "The sky here is endless." Eli joined her, his breath forming mist. "It's the same sky we both look at," he said quietly. She looked at him, trying to understand. Then for the first time she said his name. Eli. The way the word sounded surprised her. It felt gentle on her tongue. He smiled when he heard it. That small moment felt like a bond that words couldn't fully explain. It was the beginning of trust. Luria started dreaming again. In her dreams she saw her home, its glowing towers, cold metal halls, and endless order. But she also saw the cabin, the fire, and the human who never raised his voice. Her world had always been about control and survival, but this human world, fragile as it was, had something more. It had warmth. It had soul. She didn't know which one was truly stronger. One day, while walking near the crash site to collect metal parts, Luria noticed how nature had already begun covering the wreck. Snow had hidden the scars of destruction. Life moved on here. That idea made her think. Humans might break things, but they also built again. They healed. Maybe that was their real strength. That evening, she decided to show Eli something. She took a small device from her armor and activated a hologram. A tiny projection appeared, a view of her home planet. Blue forests under silver light, cities floating above clouds, and creatures flying gracefully. Eli's eyes widened with wonder. "It's incredible," he whispered. She looked at the image too, and for the first time it didn't feel like home. It felt distant. She turned the hologram off and looked at Eli. "You help me," she said slowly, her words broken but true. He understood and smiled. "And you helped me," he replied. It was the first time she realized that both of them had saved each other in different ways. That night the air felt softer. The firelight flickered against the window and Luria sat quietly, listening to the music again. She found herself watching Eli's reflection in the glass. His eyes, though human, held a strange light, steady, kind, and full of unspoken pain. She didn't look away. She thought about what her people had taught her, that humans were wild, dangerous, and unable to control their emotions. But what she saw in Eli was not weakness. It was strength of another kind, the strength to feel, to care, to heal. It confused her, but she couldn't deny it. When Eli finally went to sleep, she stayed awake, whispering softly to herself. Human, not monsters. The words were uncertain but real. For the first time, she began to question everything she had believed. Maybe love was not weakness. Maybe compassion was power. And maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous thing about humans was their ability to touch hearts that were never meant to feel. The snow began to melt slowly as the days grew longer. Streams of water ran down the hills and the forest around the cabin started to come alive again. Birds returned and the air smelled of wet earth. Lurea had grown used to the quiet rhythm of this human place. She helped Eli gather wood, fix broken tools, and sometimes watched him sketch the mountains in his notebook. She had learned more words now, enough to hold short conversations. Though her voice was still rough and her accent sharp, Eli understood her. Every word she spoke made him smile. One morning, she went out to the crash site to collect some power cells. The ship was half buried under snow, but parts of it still glowed faintly. As she worked, her wrist communicator flickered unexpectedly. The small screen that had been dead for weeks came alive with a soft blue light. A signal appeared, weak but real. Her people were searching for her. She froze, staring at the device. For a moment, her heart leapt. She could finally go home. But then another thought came, heavy and unwelcome. If the Therian military found her, they would also find Eli. They would not understand. To them, humans were dangerous. To them, he would be a threat to a race. Lurea stood there in silence, snow melting beneath her boots. The communicator beeped softly, waiting for her to respond. She didn't. She turned it off and hid it under her armor. When she returned to the cabin, Eli greeted her with a wave. He didn't notice the worry behind her calm expression. That night, as they sat by the fire, Lurea was quiet. Eli looked up from his book. "You're thinking," he said softly. She didn't answer. He placed a cup of warm tea beside her and smiled. "Whatever it is, it will be okay." She wanted to believe him. But how could it be okay when her world and his could never exist together? Later, when he went to sleep, she stepped outside into the cold night. The stars were bright, endless, and distant. She looked up and whispered in her own language, "Why now? Why him?" She had never questioned destiny before. Therians didn't believe in luck or fate, only logic. But now everything inside her felt uncertain. She could not imagine leaving this planet and forgetting the man who had shown her a kind of strength her people had never taught her. The next day, Eli noticed something different. Lurea seemed restless. She moved quickly, checked the windows often, and looked at the sky as if waiting for something. He asked her if she was okay. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Her instincts told her that Therians would come soon. They were precise, efficient, and ruthless. Once they locked onto her signal, they would not stop. In the afternoon, while Eli worked outside, she walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. The mountains stretched far into the horizon. She could almost imagine the sound of Therian ships cutting through the air. The thought sent chills through her. If they came, she would have to choose. Would she go with them and erase her connection to this world, or would she stay and become a traitor to her kind? When she returned to the cabin, she found Eli sketching again. He looked up with his usual warm smile. "You're quiet today," he said. She sat across from him and looked at his drawing. It was of her again, standing under the stars, her tail curling gently behind her. She frowned slightly. "Why, draw me?" she asked, her words slow but clear. He shrugged lightly. "Because you remind me that there's still wonder left in the world." The words hit her deeper than he realized. She looked at the paper for a long time. "No." He had ever seen her that way before. Not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as something worth remembering. That night she dreamed of home again. In her dream, her commander's voice echoed through cold corridors demanding loyalty, obedience, and strength. Then she saw Eli's face, soft and human, saying gently, "You're safe here." When she woke, her heart was pounding. She looked at him sleeping near the fire, peaceful, unaware of the danger that might come. The following evening, her fear became real. A faint blue light streaked across the sky. Too steady to be a star, too quiet to be human technology. Her blood ran cold. She knew that glow. The Aryan scout drones. They had found her. She stood outside the cabin watching the light move slowly over the forest. Her instincts screamed for her to hide, to prepare for extraction. But then she thought of Eli. They would not just take her, they would destroy everything that connected her to this planet. To them, humans were nothing more than a virus, emotional, chaotic, and dangerous. They would erase all evidence she had survived here. When Eli came outside and saw her standing still in the snow, he asked, "What's wrong?" She turned toward him, her face pale under the starlight. She wanted to tell him everything, but fear locked her voice. After a long silence, she whispered, "They come." He frowned. "Who?" She pointed to the sky. "My people." He followed her gaze, confusion turning into worry. "They're looking for you?" She nodded slowly. "If they find you, they will hurt." The word came out heavy and he understood. Eli stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then we'll find a way," he said calmly. But she shook her head. "No, you must hide." He wanted to argue, but the fear in her eyes stopped him. She looked at him the way one looks at something precious that must be protected. For a warrior raised to believe that love was weakness, that single look will before dawn. She packed her weapon and armor quietly. She decided to go before Eli woke. If her people found her near him, they would kill him without hesitation. She couldn't allow that. She left a small note written in broken English. "Thank you. Safe. Do not come." She placed it on the table and looked around the cabin one last time. Every corner carried his touch, the half-finished sketches, the mug on the table, the warmth of the fire. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Goodbye." She stepped into the cold, her footprints marking a lonely path through the snow. As she walked toward the ridge, the light from the Therian landing craft grew clearer. She could already hear their voices through the communicator, commanding, strict, emotionless. "Scout Lurea of Virella, identify. Mission incomplete. Prepare for retrieval." She hesitated. For a moment she wanted to turn and run back to the cabin, but she forced herself to stay. This was the only way to protect Eli. She pressed her wrist communicator and replied, "I am here. Landing coordinates locked." Her voice was steady, but her heart was not. Back at the cabin, Eli woke to the sound of wind. He noticed the empty bed, the open door, and the note on the table. When he read it, his stomach tightened. He didn't know what she was doing, but something deep inside him told him it was dangerous. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and flashlight and ran into the woods. Lurea stood on the ridge as the Therian ship descended. The air shimmered with light as soldiers in silver armor stepped out. Their commander, tall and cold-eyed, walked forward. "You have survived," he said. "Your duty is complete. Prepare for decontamination," she frowned. "Decontamination?" The commander's tone was flat. "The human who aided you must be neutralized. Contact with native species is contamination. You understand protocol?" Lurea's blood ran cold. "He is not a threat," she said firmly. "He helped me." The commander didn't flinch. "Then he must be erased first. Compassion leads to chaos. You have been warned before." Her hand tightened around her weapon. "He does not deserve harm." "Emotion detected," the commander said coldly. "That confirms contamination." Before she could answer, a voice called out from behind the trees. "Lurea!" It was Eli. He had followed her trail. His breath came out in white clouds as he ran up the slope. The Therian soldiers turned instantly, weapons rising toward him. "Stop!" Lurea shouted, stepping in front of them. The soldiers froze, uncertain. The commander's eyes narrowed. "You protect a human? Have you lost all sense?" Eli didn't understand their words, but he saw the tension in Lurea's body and knew she was standing between him and danger. "Lurea, please," he said quietly. "Come back with me." "You don't have to go," her throat tightened. "I must," she said softly. "They will kill you." He shook his head. "Then let them try." The commander raised his weapon. "Enough. Both of you are terminated." Before he could fire, Lurea moved faster than any human could see. Her tail lashed, her blade flashed, and the commander's weapon flew from his hand. The forest erupted into chaos, blinding light, smoke, and the crack of plasma fire. Eli ducked behind a fallen tree as the air burned with energy bolts. Lurea fought like a storm, her movements precise yet filled with something fierce and human. The soldiers shouted orders, but she ignored them. Her loyalty no longer belonged to their code. It belonged to something deeper. When one of the soldiers aimed at Eli, she turned her weapon on her own kind. The sound of her blaster echoed through the forest. A tree exploded into flames. The commander stared at her in disbelief. You betray your own people for this creature." She shouted back, "He saved me! He showed me what it means to live, not just survive." Eli watched, unable to look away. He had seen courage before, but never like this. The commander lunged forward, striking her weapon aside. They fought hand-to-hand, energy blades clashing. Luria moved with all the strength of her training, but the commander was powerful. He forced her back, sneering. "You are weak," she gritted her teeth. "No," she said, her voice trembling with fire. "I am free." With a final strike, she disarmed him and turned his own weapon toward the ground, firing a blast that melted the snow between them. The shockwave sent both of them stumbling back. The other soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to continue. For the first time, they saw a Therian fighting not for command, but for something unseen. The commander growled, "You will be hunted for this." "I know," she said, "but I will not let you hurt him." Eli rushed to her side as the soldiers retreated to their ship. The commander glared one last time before disappearing into the light. The sound of the engines faded, leaving only silence and falling snow. Luria sank to her knees, exhausted. Her armor was cracked, smoke rising from the joints. Eli knelt beside her, holding her trembling hands. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. She looked at him with tired eyes. "I had to. You showed me something." "My people forgot." He frowned softly. "What's that?" She smiled weakly. "Heart." They sat there as the snow began to fall again, covering the marks of battle. Above them, the sky stretched wide and endless, the same sky they both shared. Luria knew her people would come again one day. But for now, in that quiet forest, surrounded by the peace they had fought for, she felt something she had never known before. Belonging. The forest was quiet again, but the peace felt heavy. The snow covered the ground where light and fire had once clashed. Smoke curled through the trees and the air still smelled of burnt metal. Luria sat beside the dying flames, her body weak and bruised. Her armor was broken in many places, glowing faintly from overuse. Eli sat next to her, wrapping a thick blanket around her shoulders. His hands were shaking, not from cold but from fear and worry. He had never seen anything like the fight that had just happened. He couldn't believe how close they had come to death. Luria's breathing was uneven, but her eyes stayed sharp. She kept watching the sky, knowing her people would not give up so easily. "They will come again," she said softly, her voice weak but firm. Eli frowned. "Then we'll be ready," he replied. She looked at him, almost smiling, though her face was pale. "You cannot fight them," she said. "They have ships, weapons, power." Eli shook his head. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can fight for what matters." His voice was quiet, but full of something strong, something she couldn't explain. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained. But his courage was real. Luria tried to stand, but her legs trembled. Eli caught her before she could fall. "You need to rest," he said gently. She looked at him, and her tail flicked weakly behind her. "No, I must hide the signal." "They can track it," she said. "If they find us again, there will be no escape." Eli nodded and helped her walk back to the wreck of her ship. The forest was silent except for their footsteps crunching in the snow. The crash site looked worse now. Blackened trees, scorched metal, and deep marks in the ground where fire had burned through. Luria limped toward the center of the wreck and pulled out a damaged console. Her hands shook as she tried to disable the beacon. Sparks flew and a small blue light blinked weakly before fading out. She exhaled slowly. "Now they cannot find me. For a while, you know," he said quietly. "I used to think I was done caring about people, but then you fell from the sky." Luria looked up. "You changed me," she said slowly. "I do not know how," he smiled. "Maybe we both changed each other." The night passed without sleep. Outside, the stars shone brighter than ever. Luria watched them through the window, her eyes full of distant memories. She remembered her home world, the silver towers, the endless drills, the cold silence of discipline. There was no warmth there, no laughter. She thought of her commander's last words. Emotion detected. Contamination confirmed. She realized how wrong they were. Emotion was not contamination. It was life. The next morning, Eli worked to repair what was left of her armor using tools from his workshop. Luria helped him, guiding his hands. Together, they managed to patch the pieces with a mix of alien metal and human welding. It looked strange, imperfect, but it worked. When they finished, she smiled faintly. "You fix things," she said. "Everything you touch, you fix." He looked at her and shook his head. Not everything. Some things fix themselves when they find what they were missing. Luria tilted her head, not fully understanding, but something in his tone made her heart feel warm. By evening, a calm settled over the forest. No drones appeared, no ships hovered in the sky. For the first time in many days, the world was quiet again. Eli and Luria sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. The air was cold, but the light felt soft. Luria looked at the horizon and said, "Your world? It is fragile but strong. It breaks but it heals." Eli nodded. "Humans are like that," he said. "We make mistakes, but we try again." She thought about her people who valued perfection above all things. They would never understand this kind of strength. "Maybe your kind is not weak," she said slowly. "Maybe we feared you because you feel too much." Eli smiled quietly. "Maybe feeling is what keeps us alive." The wind blew softly through the trees. Luria closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sound. She realized that even though her world might never accept her again, she no longer felt lost. Here, in this strange, quiet place, she had found something her people had never taught her: peace. As darkness fell, Eli lit a lantern. The light cast a warm glow over them. Luria looked at him and whispered, "If they come again, I will fight, not as soldier of Virella, as Luria." He reached out and took her hand gently. "You won't fight alone," he said. She looked down at their joined hands, one human, one alien, and thought how strange and beautiful it was that two worlds could meet like this. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now the night was calm, the stars were bright, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Days passed after the battle and the forest slowly healed. The burned trees were covered again by snow and the marks of fire began to fade. The silence that followed felt peaceful, not empty. Luria spent her mornings helping Eli repair what was damaged, and her nights sitting by the fire lost in thought. The danger had not vanished. She knew her people would send others, but for now there was calm. And for the first time, calm felt like a gift. Her body was still weak, but her spirit felt stronger. Every day she learned more about human life. Eli taught her how to use his tools, how to read simple words, and how to understand jokes. At first she didn't laugh much, but when she did, the sound surprised them both. It was quiet, shy, but real. He smiled every time he heard it. Sometimes she told him small things about her world. About the silver forests, the floating cities, the silent training halls where no one ever smiled. Eli listened with quiet wonder. "It sounds beautiful," he said once. Luria shook her head. "Beautiful, yes, but cold. Too cold for hearts." One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in soft gold, Luria stood outside, looking at the horizon. Her repaired armor glowed faintly in the fading light. She had kept it not as protection, but as memory. When Eli came outside, she turned to him. "I will not stay hidden forever," she said. "They will search for me again. They will send others." Eli nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "But maybe next time you won't face them alone." She looked at him for a long time. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. "You could have left me to die in the snow. It would have been safer." He smiled faintly, his breath turning into mist in the cold air. "Because I saw someone who needed help," he said. "It doesn't matter what world you come from. Kindness shouldn't have limits." His words lingered in her mind all night. When she looked at him, she no longer saw a fragile creature from a primitive world. She saw a being capable of something greater than logic, something her people had forgotten long ago. The next morning, Luria woke early and went outside. She climbed the ridge overlooking the forest, the same place where her people had landed before. The sky was clear and the stars were still faintly visible in the brightening dawn. She closed her eyes and whispered a message into her communicator, one final transmission. "To any Therian who hears this," she said softly, "I am alive, but I will not return. I have learned what strength truly means. It is not in control or fear. It is in compassion. You fear humans because they feel too deeply, but that is not weakness. That is their power." She ended the message and threw the communicator into the frozen river below. The sound of it sinking echoed like an ending and a beginning. When she returned to the cabin, Eli was waiting by the fire, holding 2 cups of tea. She sat beside him and they shared a quiet moment watching the flames. "You sent a message, didn't you?" he asked. She nodded. They will know I am not one of them anymore." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Then you're one of us now," he said softly. Lurea smiled faintly, her tail moving slightly behind her. "Maybe," she said, "but I think I will always be both." As days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew stronger. They didn't need many words. Their silence was filled with understanding. When Eli worked outside, Lurea often stood nearby, scanning the sky, alert but calm. When she practiced using her repaired armor, he watched with quiet admiration. She moved like a warrior but smiled like someone who had found peace. One night, the northern lights painted the sky in waves of green and blue. The sight made the world look like a dream. Lura and Eli stood side by side, the colors reflecting in their eyes. "Your sky is alive," she said softly. "It moves like it feels," he nodded. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She turned her gaze toward him. "Yes," she whispered. "Beautiful." It was the same word he had taught her long ago, and now it carried the weight of every moment they had shared. They stayed there in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time since she crashed on this planet, Lurea didn't feel lost. She felt found. Later, as she prepared to rest, she looked at Eli and said quietly, "If one day I must leave, will you forget me?" He smiled softly. "I don't think I could," he said. "You changed how I see the stars." She felt her chest tighten with emotion she didn't have a name for. She reached out and placed her hand over his. "You changed how I see life," she replied. That night she dreamed of her home again, but this time it was different. The silver towers were warmer and people smiled as they looked up at the stars. She dreamed of Therians and humans walking side by side, no longer afraid. She didn't know if that world would ever exist, but the dream felt possible. When she woke at dawn, sunlight poured through the window. Eli was already awake, writing in his notebook. She watched him quietly for a moment. The man who once lived alone in sorrow now looked alive again. His loneliness had faded the same way her fear had. Lurea stood by the window looking at the endless forest. She knew her story was not over. Maybe one day she would have to face her people again. Or maybe she would help them see the truth about humanity. But whatever came, she was no longer afraid. Eli looked up and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" She turned to him and said softly, "About how small one world is, and how big a heart can be." He laughed quietly. "That sounds like something worth writing down." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of peace. And as the sun rose higher, its light touched both of them, the human who had opened his heart and the alien who had finally learned to feel. Somewhere above, the stars shone brighter as if they, too, were watching. And far across the galaxy, stories would begin to spread, stories of a Therian warrior who defied her kind for a human's kindness. She was once afraid to love a human, but when the alien met him, she learned that love was not weakness. It was the strongest force in the universe.